Wanted to put this in the context of because China's objections and some of its initial reactions to the Nobel Peace Prize, were basically four. You're violating our sovereignty. You're interfering in our sovereignty. That's one. Two, there have been many improvements over the last 30 and 20 years. Three, China is a very big country with a huge population and with diverse conditions, which happen to be all true. And finally, that democracy as a Western concept cannot be imported into China, which is also true. But China, China has also, over the last 20 years and over the last 35 years that I've been working on China, starting in the 80s when I was teaching law in Beijing, trying to contribute to building a rule of law in China, is that China has progressively not only joined the WTO and become a member of the international trade community, it has actively sought to be part of the international human rights community. And that means it comes with responsibilities, specifically these. Rights of the child, protecting all the rights of the child, and I'll just go through them. The Convention Against Torture, that means to take all steps to eliminate torture, which includes not just physical injury, but all kinds of inhuman or degrading treatment. Women, that they are obligated under these to protect the rights of women. Racial discrimination, which because of the work that we've done over the last 9 years on this issue, it does not include only race. It includes descent-based discrimination. So that means the migrants, the 160 million migrants in China, the over 600 to 700 million rural inhabitants who have to live where they were born, so that their household registration system, which controls everything, access to healthcare, housing, everything, that is a system that relegates you to a very different set of rights and benefits because you're rural versus the urban areas. We argued that that violated China's obligations under CERD, and various reviews. This is now part of the jurisprudence that's being argued and debated. Economic, social, and cultural rights. China has ratified and has a reservation, which means we agree on everything and we agree to comply with all of our obligations, except we reserve the provision with respect to independent unions. So that means we'll do everything except we're not going to allow independent unions in China. So they can do that under international treaty law, and they did. And finally, they've ratified in 1998, and then every single time something important was coming up, like bidding for the Olympics, they made it quite clear to the international community, give us the Olympics and we'll ratify it. Give us the WTO and we'll ratify it. Give us this and we'll ratify it. We're still waiting for ratification. So this is the framework of treaty-based obligations. That means these are the obligations that China as a government willingly accepted, signed on to, and have to be part of. And that's the big international frame. Now, in light of this big international frame, Greg's already referenced, but I want to direct you to something much more specific on China's policy. The most recent iteration of China's policy is not one story, but three. There are three stories China tells about how it views the internet. And the first story is the story in the Internet White Paper that was issued this year. And that story echoes all of this. That paper said, and it was meant for you to read because it was in English. And it was issued in English, so the audience was clearly meant to be the international community. And it said, we respect freedom of expression, right to information. It said all these things. And it said, we support the Chinese people to supervise and monitor and hold the government accountable. That's all in the Internet White Paper. Then there was another version, and that version was Wang Cheng, the propaganda chief of China, the highest official, who is in the State Council, on April 29th of this year, delivered a full report to the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. And that report was, we don't know how it happened, but somehow got posted on the internet on May 4th. And that would be on the internet of the National People's Congress. It was posted on their website. And somebody went to sleep and said, yikes, does that mean everyone can read it now? Does that mean anybody and anybody can read it? So on May 5th, it gets taken down, it's gone. But it had already been all over the internet. And we got a copy of the May 4th version, which we then translated in here. And we compared the May 4th version with the May 5th version, which is heavily edited. They did not appear in English. So the audience for the May 4th and the May 5th version was Chinese. But what you see if you compare the two is that on May 5th, what was heavily edited out of the report by Wang Chang was the following. All of the references to that Greg indirectly referenced, the Wu Maos and how they controlled the internet, how they used propaganda, and how it essentially viewed the internet. And they said, the internet by its very nature is an open information system. Therefore, it poses dangers and risks to us. Therefore, the challenge with the internet management and regulation is how to ensure correct and unified public thinking. And how is that to be done? And the rest of the report lays out how it's done through law, how it's done through the propaganda, how it's done through police, how it's done through security, how it's done through soft power, how it's done through acquiring media outlets in 44 foreign languages to counter the hegemony and propaganda of the foreign media. That's how it's done. It's also done by investing in R&D, research and development. That's laid out quite extensively. It's also done, there's a phrase in here that says, whoever controls the cloud computing, will control the future. So my point about that is that the Chinese, the question about the Chinese government's view of the internet and its policy on the internet, make no mistake about it, it is sophisticated, it is comprehensive, it is detailed, and it is complete. So that anyone who cares about the internet, anyone who's working in development, in capacity building and engagement at any level, I think should read this very carefully and ask the question, in this kind of climate, how is it possible? And what are the ways in which any kinds of engagement will either promote greater space or contribute to ensuring that the space that is being controlled stays legitimate? Well, let's take a quick look at what we're talking about. So what we're talking about, we talk about Twitterers and bloggers, and so how many people are we really talking about? If we start in July 2000, which is just a few years after the internet really kicked off, we mean online netizens grew from 16.9 million, which I think is about 4 times the size of the whole population of Norway, beginning in 2000, to in less than 10 years, over 420 million online. And you see all the others. I won't go through all the numbers, but you can see the statistics. What are they all doing online? And what is this growth doing? And what we're going to do is show you a little snapshot of at least what they're doing on our websites and where they're going. But because Greg mentioned Google, I thought it would be interesting to quickly share with you that the Twitterers, after Google announced this decision, that it was a very clever, creative solution, that it decided that it was no longer a business environment it could continue to do business on in China. But they did not leave China. What they did was we went for the third option. They went to Hong Kong. Now, as a Hong Kong Chinese, well, yes, we are Chinese, but we're Hong Kong Chinese. So it's supposed to be one country, two system. So it was a test. Is this really one country, two system? So they actually just moved the browser searcher to Hong Kong. But then there was a very interesting Google, a survey by Chinese Twitterers of Google's actions. And of the people who self-identified in this survey, 93% said they were Chinese. Not overseas Chinese, but Chinese inside China. And they said, how many of them, out of 420 people, how many of you view Google's move as upholding its commitment of don't be evil? 384 out of 420. How many people view that they just left China because it didn't have a market anyway? You know, it was losing, 44. How many people thought it was a promotional gimmick? 9, right? Okay. If Google withdraws from China, you'll use Baidu, that's the other service, only 24. How many answered, I will use circumvention sense technology and still use Google? 397. How many said, I'm going to call on the Chinese government to relax censorship and call for Google return home to China? 206, right? So what was really interesting was, what was the impact should the Chinese government take responsibility for making Google leave China, right? Who's at fault here? Obviously, the government should take full responsibility, 373 out of 420. And then the second batch was hard to say. Google might not have been forceful enough or able to communicate well enough to the Chinese what it wanted. That was 82.